Welcome to our deep dive on the recent court ruling drawing a clear line between executive power and judicial oversight in immigration detention. In this video, we will explore why courts intervened when the executive branch sought to hold deportees at Guantánamo Bay, what the law actually says about detention, and what this means going forward. To begin, let's outline what we'll cover.
First, we will differentiate Guantánamo Bay's role in military detention from the administrative framework of immigration detention. Next, we will break down the court's reasoning on executive overreach. Then, we will map the legal framework in Title VIII and the separation of powers. After that, we will discuss why these boundaries matter for rights and oversight. Along the way, we will include a couple of quiz questions to test your understanding. Finally, we will wrap up with key takeaways.
Before we proceed, please note that this video is educational and not legal advice. If you have specific questions or cases, you should consult a licensed attorney. With that clarified, let's transition to the core issue driving this ruling.
This ruling matters because it addresses whether the executive branch can house immigration detainees at Guantánamo Bay, a facility historically tied to military detention and national security operations. The decision is important not just for immigration law, but for constitutional governance, because it enforces limits set by Congress and policed by the judiciary. Now, let's unpack the core controversy.
Guantánamo Bay was established and regulated primarily for military and national security detainees, which places it in a distinct legal context. By contrast, immigration detention is an administrative process governed by statutes in Title VIII of the U.S. Code. The crux of the controversy arises when the executive attempts to use a facility built for military purposes to hold individuals simply awaiting deportation. Because this location is extra-territorial and associated with a different legal framework, the mismatch triggers statutory and constitutional concerns. Consequently, this move invites judicial scrutiny.
Next, we will examine how the courts evaluate such executive actions.
The court found that the executive branch exceeded its delegated authority by attempting to repurpose GTMO for immigration detention. The power to detain, particularly in the immigration realm, is circumscribed by statutory limits. Therefore, for the executive to act, there must be a direct link to congressional authorization. When the executive bypasses the statutory protocols governing who may be detained, where, and under which rules, judicial intervention is not optional, but constitutionally mandated. Next, to understand these limits more fully, we will map the legal framework that governs immigration detention. Title VIII of the U.S. Code outlines the statutory structure for processing non-citizens, including arrest, detention, and removal. These statutes specify the parameters within which detention may occur, effectively setting the boundaries for executive agencies. Congress, through these laws, determines who may be detained, where detention may occur, and under what conditions. When the executive steps outside this statutory framework, the judiciary intervenes to preserve the separation of powers. Now that we have the legal scaffolding, let's visualize how the branches interact in practice. This sequence diagram should depict the executive proposing a policy directive, DHS attempting to implement it for immigration detention, and the Department of Defense controlling access to GTMO. Congress is shown as the origin of statutory authority. The courts receive challenges to the policy and evaluate whether there is statutory authorization. When the executive attempts to use GTMO without congressional delegation for immigration detention, the diagram should illustrate a blocked path resulting from judicial review. By mapping these interactions, we can see how each branch's role is interdependent and bounded by law. Next, we will compare the legal identities of military versus immigration detention. On the left, military detention serves national security objectives and is often grounded in authorities like the Authorization for Use of Military Force and Department of Defense frameworks. It frequently involves extraterritorial locations and specialized judicial review. On the right, immigration detention is an administrative process under Title VIII, typically occurring in domestic facilities explicitly authorized by statute. It is subject to regular federal court oversight. The comparison highlights why importing immigration functions into a military detention context is legally problematic. After this side-by-side view, let's organize key statutes and facilities in a quick table.
This table summarizes how military detention and immigration detention diverge in purpose, authority, governing law, typical detainees, and judicial oversight. Military detention is grounded in national security and controlled under defense authorities, while immigration detention is an administrative process within Title VIII. Guantánamo Bay historically aligns with military detention, not immigration administration. With these categories clarified, Let's check your understanding with a quick quiz.
Question. When the executive branch attempts to bypass Title VIII's statutory framework for immigration detention, which branch must intervene? Options: A. The judiciary. B. The executive itself. C. The Department of Defense. D. Local municipalities.
You may pause the video now to think about the answer.
We will discuss the answer in the next section of the video.
The correct answer is A. The judiciary.
The courts serve as a constitutional check when executive actions exceed delegated statutory authority, especially in areas like detention that require clear authorization. Here is a concise glossary in Markdown form to reinforce key concepts. Title VIII refers to the immigration and nationality statutes that define how administrative detention operates. Delegated authority means the executive can only exercise powers granted by Congress. Separation of powers ensures each branch operates within defined bounds. The central principle is that detention must rest on a statutory foundation. Practically, this means identifying the legal basis, ensuring the facility's purpose aligns with that authorization, and maintaining judicial oversight. With terminology clarified, let's visualize the broader implications. The implications are significant. The ruling underscores that immigration detention remains an administrative function governed by Title VIII rather than a military prerogative. It curbs attempts to relocate detainees to facilities that could reduce judicial oversight, thereby preventing facility shopping that might obscure detainees' legal statuses. It also signals to agencies the necessity of aligning practices with explicit statutory mandates. Building on these implications, the next diagram will place the ruling in a temporal context. This timeline should visualize the progression from the initial executive policy announcement through the plan to use GTMO for immigration detainees, followed by the filing of legal challenges, the period of judicial review, and the final ruling. This temporal view helps connect policy impulses to legal outcomes.
With the chronology in view, let's reinforce the central legal lesson with another quick quiz.
Question. What is the primary legal flaw in using GTMO for routine immigration detainees? Options. A. It is geographically distant. B. It lacks clear statutory authorization under Title VIII. C. It is too expensive to operate. D. It requires cooperation from foreign governments. You may pause the video now to think about the answer. We will discuss the answer in the next section of the video.
The correct answer is B.
The central defect is the lack of statutory authorization under Title VIII for using GTMO as an immigration detention site. Without that link to Congress's delegation, the executive's action exceeds its authority. These are the core lessons. First, executive action in immigration must adhere to Title VIII's mandates. Second, when agencies exceed statutory limits, courts enforce the separation of powers. Third, GTMO's military identity does not align with routine immigration detention. Finally, adherence to the rule of law protects individual rights and ensures continued oversight. To close, let's summarize and point to what to watch next. In summary, the court reaffirmed a firm boundary. The executive cannot repurpose GTMO for immigration detention without congressional authorization. Detention powers are bounded by statute, and judicial review is the mechanism that keeps constitutional balance intact. As a final note, we appreciate your engagement, and we have one more section to close us out. Thank you for watching. If this explanation clarified how executive power meets judicial oversight in immigration detention, please like the video, share it with someone who cares about the rule of law, and subscribe for more concise legal analyses. In the comments, tell us, what boundaries should courts enforce most vigorously, and why? Your insights help guide future topics.